Okay, today we're going to be looking at solving quadratics with imaginary solutions. So we're going to use most of the quadratic formula, which we've seen before, because these ones cannot be factored, since they do have these imaginary solutions for the most part. Okay, to warm us up today, we're going to simplify some radicals. So we look at the square root of 40. We're breaking 40 down into two factors, so maybe we call it like 4 and 10. So then 4 breaks down to 2 and 2, 10 breaks down to 2 and 5. We are looking for pairs because we have the square root. So we have a set of 2s, which means you can pull a 2 out of the square root. We have a 2 and a 5 left over, so 2 times 5, or 10, is left inside the square root. Okay, as you look at the next one, the first thing you should think, hey, when I see that negative, I should think about an I. So this is really the same as like, right over here. You'll have like a -1, right, times a positive 36. So that square root of -1 is I, and the square root of 36 is 6. Well, you can leave it like that. Usually we write it as 6i. Okay, one last one. Square root of 162 does not come out to a nice number, but if I take 162 and I divide it by 2, I have, because remember, you could think about this as the square root of -1 times 162. So if I take 162, that breaks down to 2 and 81. 81 breaks down to 9 and 9, so I've got a pair of 9s. So the -1 is an I, square root of -1, and the square root of 162 is 9 square roots of 2. You can leave it like that, or sometimes I write it as 9i square roots of 2. Be careful about putting I at the end, because remember, you guys make sure it's separate from the square root. It will mark you wrong. Okay, do you have the quadratic formula memorized yet? Fill in the blanks. X equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So we're going to solve the following equations using the quadratic formula. So here we have a is 2, b is 3, and c is 2. X equals -b for -3 plus or minus the square root of 3 squared minus 4 times 2 times 2 all over 2a, so 2 times 2. So we've got -3 plus or minus the square root. Type in 3 squared minus 4 times 2 times 2. It's really important here that you don't type the square root in this time, that we just figure out what the discriminant is. So we get a discriminant of -7, which means, remember, there's no real solutions. There's two imaginary ones. Divided by 2 times 2 is 4. So the only thing we expect you to do now, remember, is we have to simplify that radical. So the square root of 7 doesn't break up, but I can pull out an I because there's a negative. So that would be just I square root of 7 over 4. Remember, as you type like answers into your homework, though, you'd have to have -3 plus I square root of 7 over 4. Your other answer is a -3 minus I square root of 7 over 4. Okay, let's do the next one. The first thing on this one, I probably would set it equal to 0, so I'm going to add 4 to both sides. X squared minus 2x plus 4 equals 0. So you have a 1, you've got a -2, and you have a 4. Okay, so x equals -b, so it will be a positive 2 plus or minus the square root of -2 squared minus 4 times 1 times 4 all over 2 times 1. So we have 2 plus or minus the square root. Type in that -2 squared times 1 times 4. I have the square root of -28 all over 2. Okay, so let's talk about simplifying that square root. Square root of 28 does not come out nicely, but I can break down 28 to like 4 and 7. And then 4 breaks down to 2 and 2. So we got a pair of 2s, we got a leftover 7. So this is the same as 2 plus or minus. Since there is a negative, that's I, times, and the square root of 28 is 2 square root of 7, all over 2. So remember on these ones, I do expect you to be able to kind of divide things. Remember, we broke it down into two parts. We did 2 divided by 2 plus or minus I times 2 square roots of 7 divided by 2. So the 2's cancel, and then 2 divided by 2 is 1. So you'd have 1 plus or minus I square roots of 7. So remember that means 1 plus I squared to 7 and 1 minus I squared to 7. So that's what it says when it says write your answers in complex form a plus bi. That's what they want, the real part and then the imaginary part like we just did there. Okay, let's look at the next one. First, we got to set it equal to 0. So I'm going to add 6x and a 2 to both sides. So I end up with 5x squared minus 4x plus 6 equals 0. So a is 4, b is negative 4, c is 6. X equals a negative b, so 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 4 squared minus 4 times 5 times a negative 6. All over 2 times 5. So you get 4 plus or minus. When you type in what's underneath the square root, I end up getting square root of positive 136 divided by 10. The square root of 136 doesn't necessarily simplify, so we're going to break that down. 136 divides to 2 and 68. 68 also breaks down to 2 and 34. 34 breaks down to 2 and 17. We're just looking for pairs here. So here we have 4 plus or minus 2 square roots of 34 all over 10. All right. You know what? I made a mistake here. We're going to have to go back. Sorry, guys. Does anyone find the mistake I made? So in this one, I made a mistake because I just said it was a negative 6 in my equation, and it was really a positive 6. So let's go back there real quick. We can fix it. So what we get underneath the square root should have been a negative 104. Okay, let's try that again. So then 104 breaks down to 2 and 52. 52 breaks down to 2 and 26. 26 breaks down to 2 and 13. So we got a pair of 2's here. So we have 4 plus or minus. Since there is a negative, we're going to pull out an I. And we've got a 2, so we have 2i square roots of 26, because 2 times 13 is 26, all over 10. Once again, I'd break this down to 2 parts. So we have 4 divided by 10 plus or minus 2i square roots of 26 divided by 10. 4 divided by 10 simplifies to 2/5. 2 divided by 10 simplifies to 1/5. So 1i square roots of 26 over 5. Okay, the next one. We want to go ahead and add 79 to both sides. So we get x squared plus 70 equals 0. So a is 1. There's no b because there's no x term, so there's 0 of those, and then c is 70. So here we have 0, x equals 0, plus or minus the square root of 0 squared minus 4 times 1 times 70, all over 2 times 1. So we end up with 0 plus or minus the square root of negative 280. Type that in your calculator, right? All over 2. The negative will mean there's an I, but let's break down 280. 280 I get 4 and 70. So 4 I get 2 and 2. 70 I get 7 and 10. Then I get another 2 and 5. So there's a set of 2's I could pull out. So 0 plus or minus. There's a 2 I can pull out. There's a negative, so I'm pulling out an I. And I'm left with 2 times 5 times 7, or that's just the square root of 70, all divided by 2. So the 0, you can still write it if you want. You don't have to, but this is just basically 0 divided by 2 plus or minus 2i squared to 10 divided by 2. This would just be 0, so that disappears. The 2's cancel, so I'm left with plus or minus I square roots of 70. Okay, for the record, on this one, you could have used the square root method as well, and that could have been easier. But hey, the quadratic formula will always work, so in this case, it may just be easier to stick with that. Okay, 2 more examples. These are both already solved for 0, so you get 20, you get negative 17, you get a 3. So x equals a positive 17 plus or minus the square root of negative 17 squared minus 4 times 20 times 3 all over 2 times 20. So we have 17 plus or minus 17 squared minus 4 times 20 times 3. We get square root of 49 all over 20. So we get 17 plus or minus the square root of 49 is 7 all over 20. So notice all of a sudden here, we're getting real answers. We're going to get 2 real answers because there's not a negative under the square root, right? We talked about the discriminant before. So now we have 2 parts, right? 17 plus 7 divided by 20. So we get 24 divided by 20. And if you simplify that fraction, you think about dividing both the top and bottom by 4, we get 6/5. Okay, the other answer is 17 minus 7 divided by 20. So that's 10 over 20, and that one you probably recognize is just 1/2. Okay, one last one. A is 4, B is negative 4, C is 26, since it's already set equal to 0. So x equals, the opposite of b is a positive 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 4 squared minus 4 times 26 all over 2 times 4. So you have 4 plus or minus the square root. What do we get underneath the square root? We get the number negative 400 all over 8. In this case, like square root of 400 you may recognize. That actually ends up just being 20. So if you just take the square root of a positive, we get 20. The negative just means it's I, right? So this is just 4 plus or minus 20i divided by 8. So we just got to break it into 2 parts. 4 divided by 8 plus or minus 20i divided by 8. 4 divided by 8 is the same as 1/2 plus or minus 20/8 is the same as 5/2 I. Okay, and remember there, like as you're writing the answers, you'd have 1/2 plus 5/2 I, and then 1/2 minus 5/2 I. Okay, if you just made it to the end of the notes, I'm going to tell you right now, look at those last 3 examples as you do your homework because they may help you. They match exactly, is my hint for you. Good luck.